Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Rasheen Fahandej. She's an award-winning artist, independent filmmaker, and assistant professor of emerging and interactive media at Emerson College. She's also a longtime fellow at our lab. She is the founder of A Father's Lullaby, a multi-year community co-creative initiative that highlights the role of men in raising children and their absence due to racial disparities in the criminal justice system. You can read more about her in the chat and also on our website. She's here today with Jeffrey Smith, who's employed with the U.S. Probation Office in the District of Massachusetts as the Assistant Deputy Chief. He started a fatherhood program for men involved in the federal probation system and began working with Rasheen to extend the program to work with men completing their custodial sentence. You can also read more about him in the chat and on our website. They're here to talk about their work together and their process of co-creating A Father's Lullaby. We'll talk about an hour and then we'll have time for questions. And please remember to use the Q&A feature if you want to ask questions. So without further ado, Rasheen and Jeffrey.
Thank you, Sarah. We are delighted to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. MIT Open Doc Lab, as you mentioned, has been the incubator for the project. And it's quite meaningful to be here at this platform and be able to talk about the philosophies and processes of this collaborative work together. I'm going to share the screen now. And so today, Jeff and I would like to talk about our collaborative efforts that they are basically mainly focused on two major projects, A Father's Lullaby and the Nurturing Fatherhood Program. Both projects or initiatives speak to the social challenge of mass incarceration and are centered on philosophies of care and individuals' direct action towards systemic change. Throughout the talk, we will present samples of our projects. We will discuss art as ecosystem, social systemic change, and also the role of media, technology, and community co-creation to create new social structures, but also form new solidarities around criticality, but also across differences. These initiatives that we will speak about at the beginning, they form and they are genesis of the pedagogy and the work that we initiated at Emerson College. We would definitely talk extensively about process in order to acknowledge that the processes are not simply the neutral paths, but actually manifestation of political forces that could perpetuate inequalities and amplify the same social structures that we aim to change. Before moving forward, I would love to take a moment. This project is absolutely a collective initiative, and there has been many individuals, artist collaborators, community members, institutions, and community organizations that I would love to acknowledge and thank. So let me share our screen. I hope everybody's seeing this. Okay. Let's move this around a bit. Okay. So human society is a complex ecosystem, and social challenges do not exist in isolation, but they are a network of social justice challenges that they are interconnected. This graph is considered one of the first modern organizational charts in the United States. It represents the divisions of administrative duties showing the number of class of employees in each department. And it's basically representing the New York and Erie Railroad system. And this was at a time of the invention of telegram with information overload. This was created by or ordered by Daniel McCallum, who was the general superintendent at the time. This is a beautiful representation of a small ecosystem of 1855. And now we are in 2021. Therefore, to think about a human society and social challenges, I came to this idea or formation of thinking about art as ecosystem. So in order to think about addressing social challenges that they have multi-layer of complexity and interconnectivity, there is a necessity to bring multitudes of connections and interactions together. So I'm going to take you through a few data form. This shows the trend of incarceration in United States from 1925 to 2015. This is comparing United States rate of incarceration with other countries. And this number, I generally try it with different setting that I am, and I'd like to sort of make it more interactive that I would ask, but maybe in your mind, I would like you to answer to this question that regardless of gender and race, research estimates that about 23, basically from every three American, one has criminal record. And this is based on the FBI. This was 2018. Or when you compare the people who have criminal record with people who have four-year colleges. And when you consider the racial disparity of them, the issue becomes really dramatic in a way that which populations is impacting. And this data is where I came to the project to think about the absence of fathers and how many men are removed from the communities and their network, and what that impact would look like for the families and children who are left behind. So to bring it to the next generation and to the children, I would like you to sort of contemplate on this data. So there are about 24 million children, which means 1 out of every 3 that they live without their dads at home. And when you compare that to the incarceration and jail, 92% of parents in prisons are fathers, and 2.7 million children with parents in jail or prison. So I want to come to the urgency. This for me is a reflection, thinking about where we are and where we want to be as a society, and considering that our human society is by design. And in order to change that design, we need to reflect on our philosophies and our engagement and how those philosophies are impacting our policies. So I want to sort of take it to art as ecosystem here, that as a socially engaged artist, I define my practice as an art as ecosystem, which is a network of collaborations with multiplicity of narratives that aims to investigate social systems, animates public sites and online platforms, and hoping to shift the dominant narratives around these urgent issues, social issues, or social challenges. In this process, as a storyteller, the act of storytelling and the personal political realities of intersectional issues such as race, gender, immigration, and class becomes fluid. And from this place of fluid, holistic narrative, the art as ecosystem arises. So to sort of bring it back to like a moment of artistic representation of this, I want to like share with you, kind of thinking about this graph and who's impacting. I wanted to share with you a short clip. It's a 1-minute clip from A Father's Lullaby installation. These are two screens side by side, projected on two walls, just to start sort of weaving into our talk and conversation some of the artistic interventions that has been done. Oh.
My mother was my mother was my mother. Entonces la nena se alegrará en la danza, los jóvenes y viejos juntamente. Cambiaré su llanto en gozo, los consolaré, los alegraré, alegraré en su dolor.
So to just like reference this data, there is also in the process, there is a lot of poetic data visualization that is happening with these numbers. So I wanted to take you to the actual project and maybe with a short description about it before I pass it on to Jeff. A Father's Lullaby is a community co-creative initiative that uses poetic aesthetic as the critical lens to address the social challenge of mass incarceration in the United States. The project highlights the role of men in raising children and their absence due to racial disparities in criminal justice system. The work moves across different platforms and engage people from different spectrums, from formerly incarcerated men to federal probation officers, and co-creation as a process engages a diverse group of participants. With this idea that art and creative process could mobilize audiences around the moral responsibility, that everybody has the responsibility to speak to social injustices, not just those who are most impacted by it. And the results of these processes become site-responsive public installations. Before I pass it on to Jeff, I'm going to show you one more segment of A Father's Lullaby, again, to intertwine these together. This is a 4-minute teaser. They are excerpts from 2019 installation. It's a documentation of the installation that it was at the Institute of Contemporary Art. This experience was 26 minutes long in 5 movements, 3-channel video, 5-channel audio. And there were 3 touch activated panels that they were representing formerly incarcerated fathers' portraits. So they are audio documentary that you can only engage and access them if you decide that you want to be witness to those and activate the panels and hold on to your touch. So share this one so you could.
light-skinned girl, stay home and mind, baby. I'm going away on a sailing boat, and if I don't come back, stay home and mind, baby.
She's standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be.
Well, when I first got sentenced, I was sentenced to 360 months, which is 30 years. My 28-year-old son now, he was 7 years old. And the twins, they were 45 days old. Now, I've just been released a few months ago. They're 21 now.
Like something dissolves in water. Like something dissolves in water. Dissolves in water. Place where their lullabies like transcend, dissolves in rattling bones and earth side thing dissolves in water.
When I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. Sometimes he winds up knocking me back on my knees. Well, there have been times when I thought I couldn't last for long, but somehow I'm able to carry on. It's been a long, long time coming.
Beneath a load of guilt and shame, shackled by a heavy burden,
Where their music transcends,
beneath
rattling bones
a
and
load
earth
of guilt
side thing.
and shame.
For those blessed mothers.
So good afternoon. I'm just going to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about our father program with federal probation. I started the program in 2011, 2012, and I originally started it for two reasons. One, I felt there was a need for it, but secondly, I was involved in a leadership program out of the Federal Judicial Center in Washington, and one of the requirements was to start a new initiative or a new project in your office. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to get this started. The Nurturing Fathers program is a 13-week program. It's based on the curriculum developed by Mark Perlman. It's voluntary for men on pretrial supervision and post-conviction supervision. So those of you that don't know much about the federal judicial system, under federal probation, we supervise men and women that are released pending the outcome of their case. So that released on what would be normally bail. And then individuals that are released post-conviction. So they've completed their sentence and they're in the community under the supervision of our office. So we offer this program voluntarily for the men that are fit into one of those two categories. It's also open to fathers in the community. In the last 10 years, there's been opportunities that have presented themselves where just regular guys in the community that feel like they could do better, and we've invited them to participate as well. The group meets one time per week, 2.5 hours. As part of our weekly meeting, we have dinner with the fathers, which is a very, I think, important part of the group, an opportunity to sit down and break bread and have a nice dinner together and go back and finish up the class. Our original proposal, when it was drafted, contemplated expanding the program to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So as you can imagine, there's federal correctional institutions throughout the country. There's actually only one in Massachusetts at FMC Devens, which means it's a medical center. So a lot of our fathers that are returning to the community on post-conviction supervision don't actually serve their sentence in Massachusetts. So our thought was if we could expand this to reach people coming back to our community in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, that we could maybe have a greater impact. Obviously, due to COVID-19, we were forced to abandon our group that we had started in early of March 2020. And we've been running a virtual group. We're in our second group right now, and a little bit modified. We do a 2-hour one time per week. And we're hopeful that we'll be back in person in the spring. Why start a father program? Rasheen talked about some of the statistics, so I don't need to show them again. Sorry, next slide. But I think the biggest thing that I already kind of touched on is that a lot of our individuals on supervision have been incarcerated for a longer period of time. So they're coming back from 10, 15, sometimes 20-year sentences, and they've been incarcerated outside the state of Massachusetts, which means that they didn't get regular visits that they would have had they been in a state institution, that there's more barriers. And I really felt like it was a program that could be impactful to the population that we served. And obviously, anytime you get involved in work, it's usually a backstory for why you got involved. And that is really my fathering story. I had a great father, but I had a challenging relationship with him, like I think a lot of sons experience. So that was part of my driving force as I became a father. I mentioned here that my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2007, 2008, and that significantly changed our relationship. I got to spend more time with him in his care. Got to have a lot of conversations that I didn't have a chance to have earlier. It coincided with my marriage and then the birth of my son. So I was kind of at this interesting place in life where I was losing my father. I was kind of coming to grips with the challenges in our relationship and trying to finish strong, but I was also welcoming my son. I had some worries like any father does about how I was going to do and identifying ways, not necessarily to do better, because I think my father did the best he could, but try to do some things differently. And that kind of tied in very nicely with the Nurturing Fathers curriculum. Sorry.
No, that's great.
Just briefly, I wanted to talk, without getting into detail of the curriculum, and just talk about some of the key points that we focus on throughout it's a 13-week program, but the 13th week is actually a graduation, where we invite the fathers to invite their children, their co-parents, their family, or the support system. And every father stands up before the room and reads a statement called "The Father I Choose to Be," which is their decision to do things differently, to abandon some practices or experiences they had with their father, to incorporate some new ideas and some new concepts, and to do some things differently. So it's a pretty powerful moment at week 13 when you work with these men for 12 weeks. But some of the other things we talk about are some of the unmet needs from childhood. A lot of us growing up, and I'm in my mid-40s, but we grew up with fathers that, my father was a Vietnam veteran, so he was very focused on serving our country, and he was a police officer and was a law and order type guy, which led to a lot of our challenges. He wasn't a guy that hugged, that told me that he loved me, and I think that's a similar experience for a lot of men. So we talk about that, just kind of dealing with some of those unmet needs from childhood. And for a lot of these men, that were working with this program, they had no father figure. They didn't know their father, or if they did, they knew that he was incarcerated and had little contact. So things like that someone telling them that they were proud of them, or that they loved them, or giving them a hug, those are all unmet needs from their childhood that they need to process in order to do a better job as fathers now. We also talk about the power to meet their own needs, whether that's spiritual needs, physical needs, emotional needs, but that ability to give them control over meeting their own needs so that they can better provide and be better, more available to their children. Talk about this whole role of male nurturance. I mentioned that I didn't get hugs as a child, but with my son, something that I'm not afraid to show, that tell my son that I love him, that I'm proud of him, that I hug him. All nurturing qualities that sometimes I think we growing up was the role of the mother in the family. Fathering without violence. A lot of these men grew up in volatile home environments where they witnessed abuse to their mothers, and they carried on some of those traits, unfortunately. So just letting them know that they don't need to hit their children, or their children don't need to fear them in order to follow them and be led. Overcoming barriers. You can imagine a lot of the population that we work with has significant substance abuse issues, alcohol, sometimes polysubstance abuse, anger, stress. We kind of work on some of them coping strategies to overcome some of those barriers, which obviously get in the way of parenthood. it's establishing family rules. Some of these men return to, you know, as you heard in Father's Lullaby, come home to a 21-year-old child that was 45 days old when they went in. And they need to establish some, you know, some family rules and some, you know, identify some ways that they can connect with their children. You know, for the men returning to a 9 or 10-year-old, they feel like they have to make up for lost time in some good ways, but also in some bad ways, where they have to be the disciplinarian, and just letting them know that it's really just about structure and you know, developing appropriate playtime for their children so that they can have a meaningful relationship. Just this idea of teamwork. A lot of the men we work with have multiple partners, and they sometimes, you know, speak in negative ways about their co-parent, and just getting them to identify this as an opportunity to demonstrate some teamwork and work with their parent, the co-parent, so that the child not obviously learn from that modeling, but you know, it's also the mother of your child. So even though you're not in a relationship with her right now, it's important that you show respect for her, that you have a good relationship with her, that you work together to parent your child. And just the commitment piece of it. A lot of these men are used to, you know, kind of coming into their lives of their children and then, you know, making a bad decision and going back, and just trying to get them to be more committed and to adopt some of the practices we talk about, so that they can, you know, be a long-term fixture in the child's life and not just back for 6 months and away for 12 months in this vicious pattern that a lot of them get into. Before I turn it back to Rasheen, I just want to talk a little bit about the impacts. Obviously, first and foremost, I think it helps these fathers rebuild and strengthen their relationship with their children. It promotes the nurturing fathering practices that I talked about. Helps foster a partnership between participants and probation. Then one of the biggest gifts for me in this program in the last 10 years is just, I really felt like it's broken down some of the barriers between our office and the individuals we supervise. We all got into this work to try to help people, but oftentimes we get lumped in with traditional law enforcement, and men come out, and although it's our best intention to help them, there's a barrier there that they see us as, you know, the police officer from down the street. So I think getting into these discussions with the men allows us to kind of foster a really good relationship. Creates a form of support for the fathers. I mean, a lot of these men don't have a support system. They don't, even while they're incarcerated, they didn't really lean on each other about their role as fathers or about things they could do differently. So it creates a culture and a group where men come together to talk about these challenges. And their challenges are, there's a lot of commonality in their stories. Not only in what they had or didn't have as a father, but in kind of the path that their fathering is on right now. And, you know, finally, and I think, you know, profoundly, has the ability to have a ripple impact on our community. You know, we will sometimes start a group with 20 to 25 fathers, and we'll only graduate usually between 10 and 15 because there's other challenges. Like I mentioned, when working with a population that has a significant substance abuse history, so sometimes men have a relapse and they can't continue with the program. Sometimes men aren't ready to deal with these issues, and they'll start and realize that it's a little bit too much for them right now, and they're back out. But I like to think if we can graduate 10 to 15 people, and sometimes you're talking about those men being responsible for potentially 20 to 30 children, that you can have that ripple effect. And that if these men leave the program and do better, then their child's experience would better and hopefully continue down the line. Which is kind of my philosophy going back to my role as a father. Like, my father was great in a lot of ways. He wasn't perfect. I'm trying to do things better. And I hope that, that my son will be challenged to do better than I am. So I'll turn it back to Rasheen.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So I'll come back to this later. Sorry. You know, like Jeff established the sort of philosophy behind his program, and to just tell you a little bit more and the genesis of the A Father's Lullaby. I started the research on the project in around 2015, and I also had a 2-year-old, and I was reflecting on this sort of role that we play as parents and also as society in shaping the next generation, and the responsibility that we have. Also, I started the artist in residency with the mayor's office, which was a new initiative, thinking about embedding artists into the system and working with multiple different city departments as a way of bringing artistic criticality and creative process to address the challenges, social challenges that the department was dealing with. At the time, I did shadow police department, women advancement department, city planning. So it was really an incredible process. And at the same time, also, I started the fellowship here at ODL, and I was looking at new technology and emerging technology as new ways of engaging with these challenges collectively, as poetic but also critical advocacy in a way. My research at that time was around violence, and in a way I can say that the genesis goes back to 2002, 2003, when I was teaching a lot of after school art programs around documentary filmmaking, and the topics that it was coming out was rest in peace, pins. I had students coming to the program that their bag was full with these pins, and to just like imagine that these youths and children are growing up with encountering so much violence and so much loss and absence was so astonishing for me. You know, I grew up in Iran as a minority, which was persecuted. So my experience in Iran, sort of like, so I carried that a space of looking at issues through that lens, the marginalized lens. But then coming here in a democratic society, it was really a big sort of question mark for me. And then coming back to that, when I started addressing it, was through the Boston residency and looking at the specificity of policies. And for me, there was a direct connection between the absence of fathers and men in the lower income communities of inner cities, and how that manifests and how that sort of materializes in the life of children and families and lower income communities and women who are left to, you know, to take on double duties. So I showed this because I want to come back to this idea of ecosystem. This is just like a network of the work done during the period of residency. It was about 9 months that, you know, I extended to about a year of engagement. I was housed in Blackstone Community Center. I'm going to talk about process here. That a big portion of the process was true engagements with the community, walking, going to the neighborhoods, houses, and there were many different like mini documentaries sort of created. I started with looking at the relationship between mothers and sons who are raising Black and brown kids in the inner city, and what that what that looked like, and then. But then in conjunction with that, sorry, did I pass through this? Yes. And in conjunction with that, I started thinking about this idea of how creative process is such an incredible, powerful space, but at the same time, very intimate, and how that could be utilized in a way that we are making connections and we are building new communities. So I started 3 new programs at the center for different ages that they were coming to the center around media, and media becoming the tool for storytelling, citizen journalism, but also this sort of mentorship idea that students, you don't need to be professional in order to tell your story. You don't need to be professional in order to use the tool, but actually, as you're learning the technology, you could pass it on to others. And your expertise is your life experiences is the expertise that you're bringing into the space. So these are some documentaries that the students created in the process. These are some images of that. Also, I worked with multiple different institutions, academic institutions, because another thing that I'm really interested is pedagogy and the academic institutions being the potential to bring the criticality and direct action with the community. So there were multiple. So I worked with different programs, and there were community co-creation workshops that it was presented there. And the project, another aspect of it is that it's a loop. So you have the process that they result into these installations, but then the installation itself becomes this centrality for bringing the community together, for creating discussions and conversation and participation. So for me, it's a regenerative ecosystem of a network and an expansion through the work. So at Villa Victoria, if you don't know the history of it, please do look it up. It's an amazing sort of historical landmark in South End, Boston, that it's a housing project, but they have a gallery, they have community center. So on one side, the result of that 1-year engagement, on one side, there was these work that it was created collectively with the students, with neighbors, and on the other side, it was the first manifestation of a Father's Lullaby. And Father's Lullaby has 2 arms. On one arm, I work directly with the formerly incarcerated fathers, and their stories is centered on their childhood memories and stories. And on the other hand is an open call to the community. So wherever the project goes, the intention is to mobilize and ask for the community members to record their voice, sharing their personal memories and histories as a way to create, as a way of calling for action. So at this time, I was working with the community, but I was not directly working with formerly incarcerated fathers. Many of the fathers in the community might have had the experience, but that was not the goal. So kind of taking you through these different side of the program. And then, right at the end of the residency was that the Office of Returning Citizen was formed in Boston. It was the first time we had an office at the city level that it was engaging with fathers who were just returning from federal probation. And they become partner on the project, and that's how I met Jeff. So I'm going to pass it on to you if you want to tell a little bit about the timeline, our timeline, and then move on to the next.
Yeah, so I really just met Rasheen by random. One day I was out in the community with one of the officers that I supervised. We stopped at the Office of Returning Citizens. Rasheen was there with her camera. We engaged in a dialogue. She talked about her working with fathers. I said, I run a father program. And we decided that it made sense for us to grab a coffee at some point in the next few weeks. And we did, and I talked a little bit about the program that I was running. She shared her experiences. I convinced her to come up to I mentioned the federal prisons, right? So we have the one in Massachusetts, but we don't get a lot of the fathers that we want to work with from that facility. Sometimes those men that are there have medical needs and they're older, more of a geriatric type inmate. But we do have a federal prison in Berlin, New Hampshire that opened relatively new in the last 7 or 8 years. And in those last 7 or 8 years, a lot more inmates from the Massachusetts area were going through that facility. So we really started working with them a lot more closely. We were able to work with the warden up there to bring some resources up to that facility so we can try to get a head start on for these men that were getting out and returning to Massachusetts. So part of that was we organized a reentry fair. We rented a bus in Boston and we loaded it with community providers in Boston. And Rasheen was one of those community partners that came on the bus with us and drove to Berlin, New Hampshire, which is about a 3.5-hour ride just north of North Conway. And we did a reentry fair for approximately 80 inmates. Sorry.
No, it's good. No, yeah.
Basically, that was my, Rasheen's introduction to the work that we were doing. I then agreed to participate in the Father's Lullaby. I shared some song one afternoon in Brookline. But basically, I also got my officers that I worked with and people on probation to get involved in the project, which I thought was pretty powerful. The opportunity for probation officers to work alongside with men on supervision. It again, kind of broke down some of those barriers, and we all were working towards a common goal. The interesting part of that is that part of that project ended up at the ICA, which, if you know the Boston area, the Moakley Courthouse is a block away from the ICA. So that part was pretty powerful as well, that men on supervision that were returning to the community were part of this larger project and this larger voice, which was in the same neighborhood as the federal courthouse. So we actually organized a couple of events where Rasheen and I took men on supervision over to the museum. For a lot of them, they'd never stepped foot in the museum. So the whole process was amazing. Rasheen had a lot of great ideas about how we could expand this work. When I talked about my original, one of my original goals was to expand it to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And I really just imagine that being through video conferencing. But Rasheen introduced this whole concept of using the virtual reality technology and kind of exploring that as an opportunity to engage the fathers further. So that resulted in her writing a proposal to start a class at Emerson, and then I'm going to turn it back to you now. Right? Is that right?
No, that's good.
That is
Yeah.
FCI Berlin. It's
Yeah.
a prison at the top of a set of mountains, and it's a pretty amazing place. It's kind of tucked away up there, and you know, even for those men that are in New Hampshire, don't get visits from their children because it's a 3.5-hour ride. There's transportation issues, there's other barriers, so there's still an opportunity, I think, to kind of engage those men and help them as they prepare to return. So I'll let Rasheen talk about the class at Emerson now.
Yeah, and you know what is really powerful is the mentality and philosophy and approach that Jeff is bringing to his office. So through his engagement, all of his office staff, like prosecutors that they work with, fathers that they work with, they've been engaged and coming to these programs with their ICA. All this fathers that I interviewed for the ICA installation, I interviewed them literally 1 block away. And also Office of Returning Citizen is also close by. So that sort of proximity, and also thinking about that border as a place, you know, that the slaves were coming in. So that sort of like layering of that history is very interesting. So this shows Nurturing Fathers program. These are not exhaustive graphs, but shows some of the network of Nurturing Fatherhood program and how with the Fathers Lullaby, we are sort of like engaging and expanding on them. What I wanted to do, maybe quickly, I'll take you through, I wanted to get into Emerson College Initiative, which is really kind of centralized and mobilizes all of our action and thinking into something that it goes beyond me and Jeff initiative. And that's sort of the goal, right? So to sort of how it's possible to create a ripple effect, that we are not the only initiators. But before I'll do that, maybe I'll show you a few examples of the installations that exist. You know, one aspect of the work is to make it publicly accessible and create the public site as a way of engagement. So there are, I have created multiple prototypes that the project could exist as an audio installation at the public site. This was Boston Center for the Arts, where I started working with Jeff and Federal Probation Office. This is Open a Spirit in Framingham, thinking about, it was a multi-faith initiative, and thinking about labyrinths and this sort of a space of meditation becoming the space that you actually think about social justice issue, and how there are labyrinth attached to all the many, you know, churches and houses of worship, and how this could be an opportunity to expand and bring this work to the community as a way of, again, starting the dialogue, starting the action, and toward the social change. And also there at Hubwik, there was this idea of like really kind of more complex multi-layered project could exist at a public site, and instead of community going to the institutions, the institutions or the arts coming to the community. And another side of the project is this virtual aspect that I'm using Roundware, which is like an amazing fellow from MIT Open Documentary Lab has founded. It's an augmented audio sort of landscape that you could experience on the virtual side and also on the physical side. So that's another aspect of the project, that it becomes an invite to everybody This is some of the videos from the photos from the ICA installation. Another way that I'm thinking about how the project could go to as many places as possible with less, the project is very much reliant on the technology, but how is it possible to sort of replicate that and allow that to coexist? This was an incredible project installation that it was in conjunction with multiple other pieces that it was at Concord Center for the Arts. I really love the multiplicity of these narratives. There were photo documentations of prison sites. There was an artist who was doing this beautiful black and white photos, and also these photos, these paintings are the lynching site. It's a landscape that represent the lynching site, but there is no body present. So really kind of thinking about this aesthetic poetic as a way to bring the audience into the work and to make them to be part of it and question it. So we take over this gallery space that it was multi-level, and there were pieces, all of the art pieces were like speaking in conjunction with each other. The last installation recently was at Ars Electronica, that it was 5 channels. So it was a very large scale immersive installation. I'm not going to show the video. I will move through these quickly. I want to sort of land with this sort of acknowledgement that yes, like ecosystems are complex, but also our approach in addressing the issues can be more complex and not one-dimensional. Like I'm really interested in this web of connectivity, the process and the project itself becoming a network of that mobilizes people around, and brings people through this sort of responsibility of making action. But how can we do it positively? How can we do it through this lens of, instead of talking at each other, talking with each other, and create these spaces that allows multitude of different perspectives to coexist and then form new ideas together. How it's possible to move beyond that sort of differences. And I believe the artistic, practice and the artistic role has that power to sort of moves us beyond that sort of surface level of bias and dominant, narrative that we set up. So with that, we're coming to the project that we started. I'm so excited, so thrilled. This is the 3rd semester we are teaching this course at Emerson. So I'm new at Emerson, started 3 years ago through COVID. And from the 2nd semester, I proposed, and they were like incredibly supportive of me taking this initiative of creating a course that is around emerging media and technology and giving access to the community to be the forefront of storytelling, thinking about disrupting the dominant traditional form of documentary filmmaking and take the approach of community co-creation, and then really focusing on the issue of mass incarceration. So it brings together students, fathers, and formerly incarcerated fathers and probation officers together. And Jeff has invested so much time, despite for both of us, being parents is very, so the fathers that come to the class, they are taking the Nurturing Fathers program simultaneously. And that's a very important aspect of the work, to think about how we could just like really create a support system. And it's the project is not just launching in a way, and there is this sort of continuity that is happening. This was the 1st semester that the COVID hit in the middle of the semester. Our idea, we talked to the federal judge, and there was a lot of support and excitement to think about how these tools could be used as a way of considering like what happening in the system. And so we started, maybe I skipped the video too, maybe I'll show it later if there was time, sorry. Ooh. So the process is in a way that students and fathers work together. Almost none of the students know the technology either. So it's a work and process to engage, to work together. The first part of the work is really looking at the issue of mass incarceration, doing the research and understanding this space through the data, as a data storytelling, but then come to, thinking about what are the stories of the fathers, what are the impact that they're envisioning, what are the stories that they want to see, who's their audience, and then through that, coming to create projects that could be shared with the public and create meaningful encounters outside of the processes that we are engaging with. So these are some of the slides that I'm showing from the work of the students in the classroom. The first semester, we shifted after COVID, and we created 5 different AR stories. Each father has a postcard that can be mailed and can be shared, and their story would be activated through the mobile app. And that was with the idea of, again, like access and how we could, use the work again to mobilize around that. The second semester, we were able to get fathers through the probation office. Now we are like creating a lab, I can say, like a tech lab at the Federal Probation Office, that we have 360 cameras, Oculus VR headset. And now this semester, Jeff was able to get computers for like editing VR, sound recorder. So I'm really excited that the fathers could actually check out and can access the tools, and they work with their children. So we've been over Zoom the entire time through the COVID since. So the fathers last semester, they didn't even see students, but the work was going strongly. Last semester, we had 5 or 4 projects, now I'm like escaping me, in 360 video. And some fathers worked with tilt brush with their children, and then it was mixed with the 360 video. So and father, Jeff was definitely, maybe, how are we doing with time? Okay, a few minutes. Okay. And to say co-creation, MIT Open Documentary Lab and MIT Co-Creation Lab are like been sort of, I love that how you kind of take action and create discourse around this really important processes and methodologies. So one of the the field report that we refer to is a collective wisdom, and sort of a lot of that guideline that it was already established, and not reinventing things from the beginning, but actually sort of taking what is already there and what is already happening in the field and sort of taking it our own and taking it into the next step of what does it mean for us as to do co-creation with this group. And every semester is different. I'm just taking you through these slides that they are from the Collective Wisdom field report. And I would love to be able to share, I want to make sure Jeff would say his part on this end, but also I want to share some examples of the project. So this semester, it's the 3rd week that fathers are joining us. These are some photos from the 360 videos from last semester. And Jeff, this is this is a 360 video. Maybe I'll go through, let me just quickly take you through these processes. These are from the first semester. And these are the VR projects. So, when fathers came, they were, watching Traveling While Black, they were filming themselves in the classroom. And then these are the projects that it was created in the form of postcard and AR. I'm going to acknowledge my students and the father here who created this work. This is about 3-4 minutes. Maybe we could look at one of these examples, whether the AR piece. And in the meantime, I'm going to pass it on to you if you want to talk about impact. And then maybe to end it, we will watch one of these examples of the video, or 2 of them, depending on, I think that it would be great to have discussion. So maybe one.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I just want to talk a little about the impact of our collaboration with Emerson College, because it is pretty unique in the federal probation system to be partnering with a local university in this capacity. So first and foremost is the opportunity to engage the fathers further. We see them in the group once a week, but we also, for those that are also in this class, is another 2 nights that we can engage with them. And I think that's important because a lot of these men, the more contact we have with them around doing positive things, I think it helps them be successful, teaches them to use the technology along with their children. I mean, some of these men are returning and don't even know how to use email or cell phones. So the fact that we can get them in a college class using a 360 camera while they're doing that experience with their 7 or 8-year-old kid is amazing. Promotes engagement with children. We've talked about the potential for skill development, maybe open up some employment opportunities for these men if they learn this technology and they develop a knack for it. Encourages them to share their story. They all have very powerful stories, and it allows them opportunity to do so. Also an opportunity to educate the court about these men as individuals. So 3 men last semester were all on pretrial, so they're all awaiting sentencing. And I think some of them will use this video to educate the court at the time of sentencing, which I think is very impactful. Ability to engage the community. Like as Rasheen mentioned, we have a lot of community partners that are very supportive and involved in this initiative. I think it provides hope to the men releasing from prison, that when they see these men having the courage to share their stories and they find, again, some common ground in their stories, I think it gives them a level of hope, which is important to be successful. I think there's a potential to reduce recidivism. If we can get these men engaged with their children and doing positive things in the community, I like to think that we can ultimately impact recidivism. And I think just finally, the experience itself is extremely positive for all the partners. As a probation officer to go through that, for my office, my fellow staff to go through it, for the students to get exposure to the criminal justice system from this lens, for the fathers and for the community. So
Do you want to talk about the next step too before I?
as far as, I know we're probably close to being over on time, so I'll be
Yes,
quick.
we are.
As far as what's next for us, again, we want to expand this program to the Federal Bureau of Prisons and utilize this technology behind the wall so we can get these men to start telling their stories and engaging with their children. We want to explore opportunities to engage other probation officers. We've had a lot of interest nationally about this project. And we're hopeful that maybe we can do a partnership with our fellow probation system in Chicago and Los Angeles and Miami and kind of come together for this project. And then ultimately our goal is always to increase our enrollment in the Nurturing Fathers program. I've been doing trying to do a good job getting my staff on board to learn the curriculum so we can expand it and offer it to our fathers throughout the state. So.
Thank you. So do you think it's okay to share? So I'm going to share the 360 video, which is harder to see maybe, but should I show Darren or
I think I showed Darren.
Darren? Okay. So I'll show because it might be easier to sort of actually experience. So Darren wanted to do a leather. His son's birthday was coming up, and his idea, working through the process with the student, he wanted to write a letter. And then the students, this is our first semester. So fathers only had access to their mobile phone for recording their voice, for sending the videos, sending the text. And then this was the outcome of their project. So this is Darren's, it's about 1.5 minutes.
Where do I begin? So much time has passed during the first 16 years of your life that it's almost impossible for me to make it up. I know that money, gifts, and my presence alone can't and won't make up for the time we lost during those early stages of your life. That's why, as of today, I want us to start a new chapter, a new journey together, one with you and I, father and son, as a unit, where we can get to know one another better so that we can learn to trust each other with our hearts and feelings. I can't promise you that it will be easy, but what I can promise you is that I am not going anywhere. I'm here as your father, your provider, protector, and friend when you need me to be. No matter what, I will always have your back and will ride with you and for you. I know that I'm not the superhuman that you expected me to be, and I want to apologize for that, because what father wouldn't want to be their kid's hero? But with your help, I know that I could be the dad, the father, and the man that you hoped I'd be. Because with your help, I know I could do better. All I ask is for a fair chance to show you. Allow us to create some new and better memories that will last us a lifetime. Happy birthday, son. May we be blessed to have, celebrate, and share many, many more together. I love you, D. Always and forever. Your dad, Big Darren.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's such powerful work. I love that idea of the web of connectivity and sort of network of mobilizing. And this, did the son ever respond to this, or how does that work?
So
Yeah.
this, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'll just
Yeah.
say a quick backstory. Is this individual was sentenced to life sentence in the federal system, was released under the First Step Act. Was released early under the First Step Act in 2019, but we came home. His son, I think, his girlfriend was pregnant when he got arrested originally. So he came home to a 16-year-old son that he had been away from for all of his life. So all those pictures were taken while during prison visits. So I'm not sure if the son, he's involved with the son now. He's, came out very fortunate to have a supportive girlfriend that stayed with him, and so he still has contact with the son.
Okay, all right. I know we have a lot of questions. We'll start here. Are there any in the room? There's definitely some. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for presenting and for being here today. My question is about your own process of sort of reflection, because you have such a long-term vision for this. How do you measure the metrics of if something is actually successful? Or for example, you're talking about 360, right? Like what are the impacts of 360 on men who haven't even accessed a computer? Like, is it psychologically traumatizing? Is it not? Like, how are they responding to it genuinely? And is that self-reflexivity part of your own process in generative, co-creation processes as you've exhibited? So I don't know if that made sense. I apologize if it didn't.
Yes,
But
no, we could both. What I was thinking is that, like, I'm sure we have some of the fathers on the webinar now, and I hope if they can chat, maybe they can like put their own response in the chat. From my perspective, and we could each share, and it might be different. From my perspective, it's quite empowering. Because with all of us, as human beings, when we start taking on an action or processes, when it's done, especially in the second semester, and now that there is a possibility for direct work between the fathers and their children, and the possibility that it becomes actually an excitement for them to explore these technology, to learn it in the classroom, and also like pass it on to the students. If I would have showed you the 360 example, you would have seen, because that piece is created with the daughter, and she created tilt brush, paintings in the VR, and they were like a lot of the conversation is their conversation together through the process of sort of talking through this work. So it's really, like, from my point of view, this allows media and technology and taking on challenges that it might be you never have access to, is actually quite an empowering process for me, for students, and for the fathers. I think I'll pass it on to Jeff.
Yeah, I think the technology is a little bit of a jump for them, but I think that once they get comfortable with it, I think it builds their confidence, which I think is important for them to be successful, especially in this day and age. As far as measuring the impact, I mean, the program is young enough now where I'm still in contact with all the fathers that have been involved, and for the most part, they're all doing well. But we also were kind of tracking that on our end, because, like I said, when I talked about the impact of this project, I think it could impact in a lot of different ways. But I'd love to see it, 10 years from now, that these men are still out and they're involved with their children. And so far, because we had 3 last semester, we had 4 or 5 the first semester, and I think we have 6 right now. So small enough where we can track. And like I said, because of that rapport that this process has allowed me to build with these men, and that they stay in contact. I get text on Father's Days, and they'll call me even though they're not on probation anymore to let me know how things are going. So.
First of all, I want to say it's a fantastic and very moving project, all that you're doing. I had a specific question about Lullaby. I was wondering what your interview process was like, because it looks like it was sort of based on interviews, but then there was also data brought into it. So I just wanted to know if you could speak about that process. Like, did you know you were going to do songs in the beginning, or did that emerge? And then secondly, I'm also interested in the impact question too. I love that the courthouse and the ICA are next to each other, but is there talk about, instead of getting people from the courthouse into the museum, is there ways to put
Mhm.
the installation in a courthouse or bring
Yeah, we can
museum
talk about
folks
that.
there. I'd be curious about that.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to that, and then I'll talk to the lullaby?
Yeah,
Oh,
so there
sorry.
is, the Mobley Courthouse, there's art installations, sorry. So there is public space in the Mobley Courthouse that does do art installations, so that's something that we definitely want to do, but it's a great idea, so we're hopeful maybe next year.
Yeah, well, like one aspect of it has been capacity, right? Like this work that you have seen, like it's the past 4 years. So it's been incredible sort of amount of, it's a bit a paradox, right? We are both parents, but I've been sort of working nonstop. So it's almost to the point of like, how am I present for my daughter? But really kind of really reflecting on that space of urgency. Like I worked on this based on urgency. When I encountered these numbers, I could not believe them. And for me, coming from a dictatorship like country that I consider a dictatorship to a democratic society is unacceptable. Like it's just like unacceptable. And when you look at the design again, like we have to be very specific, and that specificity to change. But so I do have that belief, right, to bring the impact directly. There is a need for a specificity, but at the same time, for me, the lens is where can I get you that you're not the audience anymore? Like where can you come to this story that colonial approach of, oh, I understand this is somebody else's problem, and ownership over the images of others, everybody except to come see fathers, formerly incarcerated fathers singing lullaby. But when you come there, you'll be quite confused. Like Jeff is there. There's a range of people. Like so the idea of where we could bring that collectivity, and I think emotions are like strong intellect, right? Are most, that's what I might believe. I want you to come to the piece from the emotion before you could rationalize what it means. And where if I can get you there as an audience, then you're not an audience, you're the witness. And if you leave as a witness, what's your responsibility? So I think the lullabies is sort of like, I really, from the beginning, I realized that it just like hits people. And what is beautiful is that you don't go to the same space. We all have different feelings and memories and emotions. And that sort of multiplicity is also beautiful to bring to that space. So we could share spaces of intimacy and care and love without having the same experience from that space. And that's the sort of the philosophy of this work, that we can come to think about social change no matter what our experience or a standpoint about that issue is the acknowledgement that there is something wrong and it needs to be fixed. I'll stop there.
Not a question, but a comment on, I was really moved by the ICA installation.
Thank
and
you.
There was something, I mean, the statistics and the news and all of that we're so aware of. But sitting there and touching that screen and just taking a moment to sit and reflect on the issue and see it from a personal perspective was really moving. So I thought that installation was very effective at bringing that human and emotional dimension to an issue that we all have thoughts about, and to kind of bring it down into what's really important. And also illustrating really nicely how we are all connected. And that was a particularly moving installation. And the question is, how do you help make something like that travel? Because there is something about being in that space that kind of takes you out of your everyday experience that it's hard to have on a website or
Yes.
on a YouTube video or whatever the case may be.
Yes. And what is about this what you mentioned is profound, and thank you for that, because that's sort of the hope, right, that you come and you leave differently, and we all know that's the problem, that we all know, but very few know the specifics or the magnitude. Like I'm wondering about like the data that I showed, like how many people are aware, like when you look at the numbers, right? 1 out of every 3 children, or when you look at 1 out of every Black man, or when you look at 1 from out of 3 American has criminal record. Like how many of you know, and is that a fact that we could live with? So for me, it's a power system, it's a power dynamic. And we, in order to bring shift and change, we need many different ways of approach. And mine is one way, right? Mine is sort of bringing it to the intimate and thinking about how can we change our philosophy or approach in nation, as a nation, to think about care and love as the solution. Rather than criminalization and incarceration and disposing bodies and humanity, right? So disposing human beings as a, and you know, I come from this lens, and you know, Jeff comes through a different lens, but the beauty is that we're just like meeting, really, like it's a meeting junction that it creates this powerful space yeah. I'll stop there. I know there was like a question here, and I'm sure there is. Yes, hi.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I have sort of like more logistical questions.
Sure.
Because of multi-layered, multi-dimensional projects that involve different technologies, filmmaking and art, I'm curious, who else were you collaborating with in terms of artists, technologists, like in this 4-year process, how is sort of like production happening, and what were your resources that you were given? Who are you working with? These different
I can't say that there has been resources, but they are minimal. So I would say there has been a lot of labor of love from many people. So in the process, I collaborate. That's like the part of, you know, the installations themselves that I definitely collaborate. I have composer collaborators. If you go to the website, or, you know, like, and hopefully in the future, I would love to, you know, give face to all the people who are been involved. Again, like the issue of time and capacity, but that definitely would be beautiful to sort of go through pages of collaborators, community members. There has been so many, also different institutions. So the way that I've been working at it, it's been sort of this sort of gradual of getting one funding. So definitely the Boston's residency was significant, a start, and you saw how much work was done, but not a lot of it through the budget, which would have been very helpful, but a lot of the commitments. But that was an amazing incubator in conjunction with the thinking and work and research that I was doing in ODL. But then, you know, we are at the stage that I'm thinking system. From the beginning, I was thinking this is not, you know, when you talk about art as ecosystem, you cannot be one person in the forefront running it, or 2 person, right? It needs to be a systemic. And from the beginning, I was thinking is an organization and how to make it there, how to, you know, make it to become that capacity. Definitely, there is like a potential, like at the engagement lab at Emerson, they are really lifting up this studio partner initiatives, and I'm really hoping through the partnership with them, we would be able to re-strategize to really scale it up. Because I think till now, I've been working on the portfolio of the project, so I don't have to convince people, right? Because like I had to put a lot of effort, so I don't have to use my words and be able to just showcase. And Jeff's side is the same. Like he's been doing a lot of work to get to this space that now we are thinking we should re-structural, really think and have partners that they can help us, you know, build the infrastructure to make the work more independent of the artists. Because I have so much prototype and many different ways that this project could exist. And there are many other ways that we could think about. So we are at that point. So that's sort of definitely the next action step for us to be able to scale, to scale and go deep at the same time. And one more thing that I wanted to mention is that, you know, at the last showcase of the students, we had federal judges who came, the entire office of federal probation office. You can explain it more, like, which was really a great initiative because students and fathers were presenting, talking about all of these critical perspectives and their approach, and they were showcasing their work. and to have, you know, people from all different sides of the spectrum to be partner and think with us what change means in their space is quite essential. But again, like how to follow up with that, and yeah, so maybe I'll pass it on to you if you want to talk about that.
The showcase was an excellent opportunity for us to bring and some of our stakeholders to the table, our judges, our probation staff, various community partners that we work with that knew that, you know, that we're working with this population and that we're trying to, you know, focus on our fathers. But, you know, and also bringing in staff from our administrative office in DC, just to kind of get some more exposure to this initiative with the hope to grow it. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, why I think we'll have the opportunity to expand that to some of our federal probation systems throughout the country, because they've seen it and they want to be involved in it. And I think it's a great opportunity to showcase Rasheen's work. And I think more importantly, to engage these fathers.
All right, we have quite a few questions from the online audience, so we'll take a few of those. So this one from Lily, she says, "Hi, Rasheen, beautiful and powerful work. I'm wondering if you can talk about how you think about your power and positionality as the artist and how aesthetic or artistic choices are made and shared between you and your co-creators."
Mm-hmm. So one thing that is, you know, I want to acknowledge is that the process is not a unified process, right? So there are different ways of engagement, and some part of it, definitely the idea is to give full agency to the community co-creators. On the other parts, I'm taking on full agency of like thinking about this sort of artistic representation. So I want to acknowledge that, and for me that a spectrum is important. I don't have the same relationship with every person that I talk to, but some people similar to Jeff, like we have text and phone call after like 4 years still. So the acknowledging that there is not one way of doing this is important, but what is really important sort of philosophically and ethically for me, morally, is that when I'm taking the ownership, I'm really mindful. When I'm taking ownership of making choices, especially for the outcome of the installations that I do, is that I make choices based on that power dynamic, and that I give power to the voices, and I want to equalize and disrupt that space. And I feel like I would love to hear feedback if it is otherwise too, but I feel like that's been sort of the centrality, that if I as an artist sort of take on what are some of the criticalities that I should think about, but at the same time sort of like balance it with the work and the commitment that I put in the processes that they are co-created. But I do think it's important to have the both sides, because I do see a lot of relational art or projects that they become only about process. And for me, it's so essential and it's so important to sort of like, I give, 80% of my time goes to process, right? But for me, it's so crucial to have a tangible outcome that can be shared. And I think it's possible. You saw the project. This was a month, less than a month and a half. Taking on an AR project is an incredible undertaking. It's a big production, but to do that with the students and fathers who don't know, the technology, but actually achieve something that you hear and you're moved, because it's about at the end is about the story. It's about human connection, and as an artist, you do have to make choices where you also navigate that.
Yeah, and along those lines, a question from Charity. Hello, Rasheen. Have you considered allowing users to add their own experiences with the judicial system, parenting, being parented, and networking those into the greater narrative? She says this could be done by creating a standardized way of people submitting their narratives and automatically creating a node in relation to the greater work that could shuffle through alongside the captured narrative.
Yeah, no, thank you, Charity. Yes, absolutely. from the beginning, I talked about the project with two arms, right? One would be this sort of very specific locality and bringing the communities together at local spaces through these physical installation and workshops and public engagement. On the other hand, from the get-go, the idea was to have this sort of virtual network and platform that connects localities. And I have a platform that we've been using, as I mentioned, like through Roundware, that is augmented audio, and it's a wonderful platform. But I also think that I need to sort of have, it's definitely a side of the project that I have not been able to commit to it as much. And that's another side of the work, to sort of how to expand that virtual common and allow people to sort of create their own commune there, and how the stories are told and shared. Absolutely. But that's sort of, it was from the beginning in the genesis, but I think what we have now is something that it could be expanded, definitely, and more powerful.
Yeah, and maybe that partly answers this next question from Maria. Thank you so much for this powerful, inspiring presentation. How can media artists, activists get involved and expand the projects to other communities?
Please. Absolutely. Contact us. Yeah, this is about that. Absolutely. So if you're interested, we'd love to have collaborators. We'd love to sort of pass on the learnings and also think together what might be some of the, like a encapsulated curriculum, or like something that it could be. That's the idea. But again, like that was another side that this is the sort of the next steps, that how can we think together and expand this beyond what we've been doing. And every person who brings it, that's the beauty about co-creation process, because the idea is that things would happen through these connections that none of us would envision, right? So through this sharing of ideas. So please do write to us.
Right, here's a question that's relevant to co-creation about ownership from Barak. In this process of co-creation, how does ownership figure with a researcher, prison, and prisoners involved together?
We do a lot of work in the classroom around that, but definitely we could like create more systems. Do you want to speak to that, like about our process of like that we do a lot of conversation with the fathers and the students, and this sort of like, yeah, shared ownership? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we do educate the men a lot about, the life of this project when they are no longer involved, and a lot of them they've all been supportive of it, kind of moving on after us. We talk, Rasheen spends a lot of time with them talking about the potential for it to end up in all different avenues and making sure that they're fully aware. But I think, either we've been lucky so far, the men we picked, but they're all supportive of the greater good that this project can have, and they've all been real supportive of it. And we didn't have any challenges with that so far, knock on wood.
Yeah, and committed, that's another part of it too, that like in the first, we do a lot of work during the classroom, talking about what it means and how do you want to be involved beyond the classroom. And like we do have a lot of actually students and fathers, and one of the ideas that we have is to create a network of alumni, because the idea is not to just do one thing for one time, but then how this could be actually a community that grows and support each other and really would be able to work on impact beyond the classroom, because the semester is very short and we do a lot. But there is so much potential for like what to do with the projects and how to move them beyond. And definitely, I think, again, like I would say on my capacity and like how we should create a network of a system that it will create that idea. But the idea is that it's a shared, every semester we talk about it and the students and fathers decide together. Like, so the people who stay behind, like connected, they will be more involved in like making actions and decisions. But the idea is that the project is beyond students and fathers. The project is for the cause and for the impact. And from the slides that I showed, you saw like there is a lot of like thinking around that. And for each group might be different, as it is every story that you hear or see.
Okay, we're out of time
Oh.
unfortunately, but thank you so much
Thank
for sharing
you.
this incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you and to the audience online for all the great questions. And please join us next week when we have Sarah Ellis from the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.